All righty. I'm so glad you guys made it today. I hope you had a good week and weekend. Did you guys do anything fun that did not involve getting arrested?
And that's all I did. Crap.
Yeah, I'm sure. One thing that I've noticed is Utah Tech people, they are the calmest, most together group of students that I've seen that I've worked with for a long time, and I'm very grateful for that. There was an interview on the campus newspaper. There was a campus club that had to move or felt that they needed to move to virtual meetings instead of in-person meetings, just because people were a little. Some of the members were just unnerved, and one of the main people in the club said that, "Hey, we'll do whatever we need to help people to stay calm, but it's kind of silly. I mean, it doesn't. I don't care about your politics. Anybody can come and share a bagel and get their nails painted. We don't really care what you're thinking about politics. We just want to be neighbors." And I thought that's a pretty chill attitude. I like that. I This week, as you can see on your screen, we're going to be dealing with classical India and Southeast Asia. And I this kind of stuff is really frustrating to me because there's so much stuff that we cover, and it just is completely unfair. There are so many things. I don't know if I told you guys a week or two ago, but a friend of mine was Lacey Peterson. He was the elder for the Native American Church for the Utes and here in Utah. And one of the things he said was almost any place you put your foot, anywhere in the state, there have been 100 to 1,000 other people that have stepped there in that exact same spot at some point in the history. And he said, it's the land doesn't belong to anybody; it belongs to everybody. And I thought, just with that kind of a thought, I start thinking how many hundreds and how many thousands of other people have lived and raised their families wherever I go. Wherever I look, there's somebody that's already been there. And that's kind of how I feel about going over the art history of a place like China and Southeast Asia. We only have an hour and a half, and you'll only spend a week looking at this stuff, but there is so much to look at. We've already looked, if we zoom in, we've already looked right around here in between Pakistan and India. Can you guys see what I'm seeing on my screen, this large map?
Yep, yep.
Okay. So the Indus Valley is right in this area, right through here. And there's also, let's see, Dwarka is in the Arabian Sea over here. Um, there's just a lot of different stuff, but we're only looking at a little bit. And so, we are coming back to this, but this time we're going to be looking at classical India instead of the older, more historical stuff. And we're going to be looking at just a brief overview of some elements of Southeast Asia right through here. And again, I don't know, it's frustrating because there's so much stuff to look at. One of the things that I think is really interesting, can you guys hear my dog?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, she's letting me know how bored she is, and she hears your voices, so she wants to participate. But one of the things that's crazy to me is there is so much history in this area, and there are places that people have lived and died that we probably won't even know about for centuries. And there is a guy who works for National Geographic in I can't remember if it's on one of the islands. It might be Borneo, but I'm sorry. I'm gonna give me just a sec. I'm gonna go put the dog in her in the laundry room, and I'll be right back. Quit whining. Quit whining. She's an Airedale Terrier, and so she really, just like my kids when they were 5 or 6 years old, she knows how to push all your buttons. Really annoying. But in Indonesia, this guy works for National Geographic, and it's on one of these islands that has a huge reserve where they know the Bengal tiger is. And it's like one of 6 Bengal tigers in this part of the world. And they know the tiger's there. That's why they have the reserve. That's why National Geographic employs them. But this guy said that in the last 20 years, nobody's seen the Bengal tiger more than like once or twice. And they know that there's 6 of them there. He said that people have witnessed myths like the Naga and the Orang Pendek, which is like their version of Bigfoot. They've had closer encounters with that and more physical evidence of that than they have of the Bengal tiger, which they know is there. And I just think that that is just so crazy to think about. But that's, and then right up here, if we go to this area right near Lucknow, this is where the red panda, which is another incredibly rare animal, is. There were villages that thought that the wild man, like their another version of their Bigfoot, was attacking people, and they actually found out that the red panda, which lives right around here near Lhasa, has expanded, and there's actually a family of red panda in northern India right here. That since nobody, the animal is incredibly rare, and people mythologized it immediately. They didn't know what they were looking at, so they thought it was a Bigfoot. So I just stuff like that I think is wild, thinking about that in our world today. But as you guys go through this, I want you to look at as much of this as you have time for, and I would recommend doing it all if you can. But before we get into that, there is something that I included on your attendance that I actually wanted to watch with you guys today and talk about it a little bit. And this is, what is art for? Now, we talked about um, where the meaning of art comes from. We did talk about that. We talked about um, some of the things behind art, what makes art. And I wanted to talk a little bit. I really like this short video. It's about 6 minutes, and it talks about what art is for. And I think that this is important, and we probably should have done it the first time we met. But as we go forward through the rest of the semester, this is a really good thing to have in your back pocket. And I really believe it will help as people write their weekly reflections, and go through the tools of artistic critique. So I'd like everybody who is here with me right now, watch this with me. So Zach, Scotland, and Cassandra, watch this with me. And then when we're done watching it, I would like each of you to make an observation about this. There's 5 reasons for what is art for, and I'd like each of you to pick your favorite so we can talk about it. Okay, did you hear that chord?
Yes, we can hear the video.
Okay.
You might think there was a simple answer to this. After all, we know how to say what most things are for, like this or that. And people flock to museums like never before, so they must have their motives. But when it comes to art, people get strangely afraid to ask too directly what it might all be for. Because, well, everyone except you might know the answer already. It's perhaps too obvious, it's perhaps too complicated. The result is an awkward silence and a lot of confusion. But maybe it shouldn't be that hard to say what art is for. Maybe we can have a go at ascribing certain rather clear purposes to art. Here's 5 things that art might be able to do for us. It's an obvious but striking fact that the most popular works of art in the world show pretty things. Happy people, flowers in spring, blue skies. This is the top-selling postcard in the world from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. This enthusiasm for prettiness worries serious types a lot. They wonder, have people forgotten what life's really like? But that seems a misplaced worry. We need pretty things close to us, not because we're in danger of forgetting the bad stuff, but because terrible problems weigh so heavily on us that we're in danger of slipping into despair and depression. That's why prettiness matters. It's an emblem of hope, which is an achievement. Prettiness, those flowers and blue skies and kids in meadows, is hope bottled and preserved, waiting for us when we need it. The world often requires us to put on a cheerful facade, but beneath the surface there's a lot of sadness and regret that we can't express from fear of seeming weird or a loser. One thing art can do is reassure us of the normality of pain. It can be sad with and for us. Some of the world's greatest works of art have been loved for their capacity to make the pain that's inside all of us more publicly visible and available. Like putting on a sad piece of music, somber works of art don't have to depress us. Rather, they can give us the welcome feeling that pain is part of the human condition. Art fights the false optimism of commercial society. It's there to remind us, with dignity, that every good life has extraordinary amounts of confusion, suffering, loneliness, and distress within it, and that therefore we should never aggravate sadness by feeling we must be freakish simply for experiencing it quite a lot. All of us are a little unbalanced in some way. We're too intellectual or too emotional, too masculine or too feminine, too calm or too excitable. The art we love is frequently something we're drawn to because it compensates us for what we lack. It counterbalances us. When we're moved by a work of art, it may be because it contains concentrated doses of qualities we need more of in our lives. Perhaps it's full of the serenity we admire but don't have enough of. Perhaps it's got the tenderness we long for, but that our jobs and relationships are currently lacking. Or perhaps it's suffused with a pain and drama we've had to stifle but want to get in touch with. Sometimes a whole society falls in love with a certain style in art because it's trying to rebalance itself, like France in the late 18th century that wanted David as a corrective to its decadence, or Britain in the 19th century that looked to the pre-Raphaelites to counter the effects of brutal industrialization. The art a country or a person calls beautiful gives you vital clues as to what's missing in them. It's in the power of art to help us be more rounded, more balanced, and more sane. The media is constantly giving us hints about what's glamorous and important. Art also tells us about what's glamorous and important, but fortunately, given that you weren't invited again to the Oscars this year, it usually picks on some very different things. Albrecht Dürer makes grass look glamorous. John Constable draws our attention to the skies. Van Gogh reminds us that oranges are worth paying attention to. Marcel Duchamp challenges us to look again at the seemingly mundane. These artists aren't falsely glamorizing things that are better ignored. They're justly teasing out a value that's been neglected by a world with a deeply distorted and unfair sense of what truly matters. Art returns glamour to its rightful place, highlighting what's genuinely worth appreciating. Nothing seems further from good art than propaganda, the sort encouraging you to fight or what government to support. But one way to think about art is that it is a sort of propaganda, in the sense of a tool that motivates and energizes you for a cause. Only it's propaganda on behalf of some of the most important and nicest emotions and attitudes in the world, which it uses its skills to make newly appealing and accessible. It might be propaganda about the simple life, or about the need to broaden one's horizons, or about a more playful, tender approach to life. It's a force that stands up for the best sides of human nature and gives them a platform and an authority in a noisy, distracted world. For too long, art's attracted a little too much reverence and mystique for its own good. In its presence, we're like someone meeting a very famous person. We get stiff and lose our spontaneity. We should relax around it as we already do with music and learn to use it for what it's really meant for, as a constant source of support and encouragement for our better selves.
It's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard.
I like that quote. It's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. Now, if you'd like, I will put that link in this week's attendance again. I did do it last week, but So he talks about 5 different reasons for art, and I think there is very practical reason for art. What of those 5 reasons, what struck each of you?
I I think art keeps us hopeful is what stuck out most to me. I think I utilized most of these tactics in my art, but that one I try to employ the most. Enthusiasm for the pretty or emblem of hope. There's a photographer I like, Henry Cartier Bresson, I should say. But he would do really happy, sad photos. He's got one of a hole in the wall that looks like it's from a missile. It was taken in Spain, but it's a bunch of children playing in the background, smiling. So they're like unaware of their surroundings. So I think him showing optimism through his photos, but the reality of uh, I guess it's kind of like documenting a wartime. I think he uses that in a lot of his photos. So.
I like that. That's a really good perspective. There's Harlem Renaissance is one of those periods of American history where there were just a group of incredibly brilliant people. And as you were talking, I was thinking about some of my favorite photographers in the world come from the Harlem Renaissance. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Gordon Parks is his name. I love Gordon Parks' photography because, when you were talking, Zach, about that, it made me realize why. Because he's one of these people that will do that happy and sad at the same time. So I was going to try to see if I could find one of his photos. All right, let's see. Yeah, here we go. This is not a particularly happy photo, but there's always some humor in it when he would do his thing. And then he'd also do absolutely beautiful, gorgeous things that just make you happy that you get to see it. And I think like this photo that is of a beautiful mother and her daughter all duded up, ready to go somewhere nice. And I love photos like that. Or a couple that's been married forever. Or just like this is the photo that I'm thinking of. He did do a lot of political commentary, but he shows absolutely beautiful people. And that's one of the things that I really love. Any other observations?
I didn't notice anything about that photo other than how pretty it was until you scrolled up on the screen and it said colored entrance, and it gave me totally a different perspective of the same photo. That's wild.
Yeah, and this is what Gordon Parks did all the time, because he could crop this, and this family could have it as a beautiful portrait, and that's how sometimes he would display it, and then sometimes you would see the whole thing. This is from a time period in our country where the highest paid entertainer in North America was Billie Holiday, and she could not stay, eat, or use the bathroom in many of the venues she performed at. And she was the highest paid entertainer in the country. And but Gordon Parks, I don't know, he did riffs on famous Baroque and Renaissance paintings too. Every once in a while, he did it subtle enough that unless you know the painting he's riffing on, you have no idea. But he was later tasked by President Roosevelt to be one of the linchpins for the Farmers Bureau photography. where there was Roosevelt had had a gentleman select about 20 photographers that were going around the country taking pictures of what was actually going on during the Depression, and Gordon Parks was one of the main ones of that. But
Dorothea Lange was another one.
yeah, yeah, Dorothea Lange was another one. Just I don't know. There's something really special about that. How about you? How about anybody else?
I was gonna say as I was writing these down and we were watching the video, I was kind of with at least for the art keeps us hopeful. I was like, oh, it can kind of like rebalance us and connect us, and those were the next 2 points.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's cool.
So like in my head, I was already like, we can't really forget like the dark things that are happening in front of us, like they kind of talked about might be happening. But like
Right,
it helps us connect to people and rebalance us in spite of those dark things happening. And then they just immediately kept saying that through the different steps or
right.
different topics.
So you were a step ahead of the narrator.
Apparently on accident.
No, but I think that that is really right on too. I mean, that is something human beings keep making art, and it's interesting to me that for the most part, the depressing stuff. I mean, there are serious collectors of it and everything like that, but it doesn't have the kind of staying power other than documentary that the brighter stuff does. You know, people love having the brighter stuff, and then you get artists that are able to hide really brutal things inside of a pretty landscape too. But which I think is interesting. But yeah, a lot of the artists that we like, Van Gogh. What I love about him is he had all these mental issues. He had some serious problems, but instead of showing that, he chose to share with people how he saw the world with incredible energy and colors. And I think stuff like that is really amazing. All right, Scotland, did you see anything that really struck you in that video? Okay, say that I admire came through chat. I admire the idea that art rebalances us. It is often said that opposites attract, which I find valid given experience. There is so much art you would never find yourself liking, but you do anyway. And I like, oh yeah, and they're in the library, so they can't speak. I really like that. And it talks about symbolism. It can be refreshing to think about something that's different from your thoughts and beliefs. We all yearn to learn more and think outside who we are, even if it's difficult. Yes, I really that is a great. Thank you very much. That's an excellent observation too. And yeah, all those are wonderful. And this is something as we move forward and look at this stuff. Art isn't just about uh, showing religious stories, historical events, making people look better than they do, or anything like, art is about a lot of different stuff. And even when artists do that, like the court portraitists during the Renaissance, Baroque, and the Enlightenment, uh, they had to do that, or they did a lot of other things in addition to just documenting people. And there's always layers going on that I think are really fascinating. So stepping back into the main theme of our class, going back to that, I'm just hoping you guys hold that in the back of your heads as we go through the rest of the semester, those three videos. And I will include that third video again in the attendance thing, just so that people who aren't here live can watch it themselves too. But now as we go into India, this is really a fascinating part of the world. We talked a little bit. We already did Indus Valley, which is right here in between Pakistan and India, right on that border. Some of the interesting things is that people have lived here for a very long time. human beings were able to manipulate stuff. And I mentioned this way back in our prehistory. Right in this area here is where the oldest human-made tools in the world have been found. And they are, depending on who you want to talk to, the Chinese government is convinced they are about 2 million years old, and other people have dated them more recently. But it just, they are leaps and bounds older than what anybody else imagined human beings could have done. And what in India, what we're talking about is a culture that has written scriptures that talk about time periods millions of years ago. And the knee-jerk reaction for other cultures when they see that is to believe that it's all just myth. But what is fascinating is that's not how people in India view it. They believe their history goes back millions of years. So it is something to think about. But as we look at this, there are a lot of different religions in this part of the world. And all those religions do inform the art and the architecture. And we'll see some very clear ideas of or examples of how it informs the art and architecture. And one of the things that is really amazing too is that even though the area we're looking at covers all of this, the different groups of people, those religions inform on some level a lot of this stuff. You know, a lot of people through here, it informs their art and it informs their culture. Uh, um, I included a 2 or 3 minute video for each of these kinds of religious worldviews. I have a friend who lives in southern India. She lives right around here. And she was telling me that people think that that everybody in India thinks the same kind of thing, other than there's Buddhists and there's Muslims. She said the reality is there's at least 400 languages that are spoken in this area that's pink. And that's, at least 400 languages. And each of those represent a culture that is its own distinct thing. And the reason why almost everybody in India also speaks English, it's because that's the easiest and simplest language for everybody to learn. So people speak English just so they can understand each other, because somebody living right here is going to speak a very different language, grow up speaking a very different language than somebody right here or right here. And English is just something that's simple for everybody to share. Oh, that was kind of interesting. But I want to touch on each of these. I'm only going to talk about it for just a couple seconds. Animism is a way of viewing the world where every element that you encounter has its own life energy, has its own energy, has its own perspective. And it's not all going to be the same perspective. It's going to be different. But the idea that a rock or a tree or a tiger can be its own thing on some spiritual level. Hinduism is this idea that there is a divine source for something, and that divine source continually reveals facets of itself so human beings can start to encounter it. And so on one perspective, you can say there's 10,000 gods in Hinduism. From another perspective, the 10,000 gods is actually 10,000 facets of the same divinity. But an example of how this might work is that Shiva and his consort Shakti represent the divine masculine and the divine feminine aspects of this ultimate divinity, and their dance brought the universe into being. And what is fantastic to me about Hinduism is that that's one of the reasons why a lot of cultures interact in the bigger country of India, is because of this understanding somewhere in the culture that believing things that are not exactly the same as you is not a threat to you, because they're just attracted to a different facet of divinity. When it works, it works really well. cantankerous people always find ways to start arguments when there's no reason to. So there's still going to be issues and problems and stuff like that. But I love that perspective on Hinduism. When we look at Buddhism, the Buddha, it's called Buddhism because of a gentleman named Gautama Buddha, who lived, I think, about 2,400, 2,500 years ago, something like that. He was a spoiled snot of a prince. And he was a young adult. He realized this is a waste of time. I have everything I could ever want, but I'm not feeling fulfilled. I don't feel satisfied. And he rode off on his horse, disappeared for a while. And while he was thinking things through, he connected with the ultimate divine source and recognized that everything in this material world is illusion. And what we really need to work to do is to make our spirit worthwhile. Having is not where it's at. It's being the complete person. And Gautama was so influential that this worldview was named after him. And then you find out that this idea of divinity, like we talked about the Mayan idea of divinity, is that facets of connection to that divinity can come to earth and inhabit mortal bodies, and they're called avatars of the Buddha. And in Hinduism, those mortal bodies become avatars of the Hindu facets of divinity. And but the Buddha taught people how they can really get along. And what's really interesting is that each of these faiths also have iterations of something called the Golden Rule, which, if you remember, the Golden Rule is treat others as you would have them treat you. Every faith around the world, every worldview has some sort of reflection of that, which I think is interesting. And in Islam, this is another one of the main religions in India. And a lot of Muslims were forcibly relocated to Pakistan. This all used to be India, but Pakistan was declared because there seemed to be a lot of problems between Muslims and Hindus. And so a lot of Muslims were forcibly moved into the Pakistan area. But Islam came quite a bit later. Animism was the earliest, then came Hinduism, then came Buddhism about 2,500 years ago. And then we have Islam coming about 1,000 years after Buddhism. And in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century was really concerned that so many pagans were hurting each other because of their different beliefs, and that Christians and Jews were not getting along with each other. And he wanted to resolve that. And he went through a period of time where he spoke with faith leaders. He was a person of incredible integrity, spoke with faith leaders, and finally found a cave where he just started praying for guidance. And in the fall of 610 AD, he was visited by the angel Gabriel. And this is the same Gabriel who announced to Mary that she was now pregnant for the Christians. And the Prophet Muhammad was told to memorize what the angel Gabriel told him. And what happened very quickly over the next 40 years is the whole region in the Arabian Peninsula changed because of this religion. And we're talking about this area right through here. The whole region changed. When the Prophet Muhammad was on the scene, when he was alive and a young man, women were given less rights than the family goat. And your daughter, until she was the age 14, you could bury her alive in the sand if you felt she was a drain on your resources. And the Prophet Muhammad instituted the use of the hijab, that hair covering, that he borrowed from Christians that he knew, and the Christians had borrowed it earlier from Jews. And it was designed specifically to force a man to look at a woman in her face and her eyes so he could recognize her humanity. So very, very interesting. But so those religions are all a big part of it. And then after the Mughals came and ruled India in the north, tensions between Islam and Hinduism started getting really violent. And there was a guy named Nanak who did not like that. And so he started a series of study, fasting, and prayer to find out how he could connect Muslims and Hindus so that they could coexist peacefully. And he became Guru Nanak and founded Sikhism. Sikhism is a religion that is designed specifically to live a practical life and be a good neighbor, essentially. So those are all the kinds of stuff that inform the art that we're looking at. And classical India, we're looking at a time from about 2nd century AD to about 12th, 13th century AD, right in that big area. So anyway, and then we're also going to be looking at different things. So and then here I mentioned that as we look at Southeast Asia, in each of these countries, in each of these areas that are now countries, there were anywhere from 3 to 40 distinct groups of people that also had to learn to get along, that had their own faith traditions, that had their own worldviews. And over time, those 5 religions from India spread and interacted with all these people. So you get a huge melting pot of different religions, different worldviews, lots of different stuff. So I definitely look at that article, People of Southeast Asia from Britannica. So in India, there's a lot of stuff to get through, and I am kind of going fast, but I'm hoping you guys aren't. If you have questions, go ahead and shout them out. But in India itself, there is a lot of stuff. Do you guys remember what I said just a little while ago about Shiva and Shakti and how the universe was made in in the most ancient of Indian traditions?
Yes.
What did I say about how Shiva and Shakti created the universe?
Specifically, that they were they were the divided masculine because my brain's a bit fried for that. Ugh.
Okay. Shiva represents the divine masculine,
Yes.
Shakti represents the divine feminine, and their dance provided the impetus for the Big Bang, essentially. Their dance brought the universe into being. And the reason why that's important is because, we have a problem in the West where we confuse gender and sex. Sex is a biological thing. Gender is how we view ourselves as human beings. And every culture has these kinds of conversations. And as we go through Southeast Asia, you'll find stuff in some cultures, they recognize 5 different genders. In Japan, there's at least 3. And what is interesting to me is what it boils down to is we see masculine and feminine archetypes coming together to create the whole being. So a completely healthy individual in this ancient Hinduism is somebody that connects with those aspects of themselves within themselves. And so when we see a picture like this, when Western explorers came, as particularly British Christians came to India to exploit the people and the resources, they thought it was all pornography. And it's not. These images, I'm not going to keep it on the screen and show you because I do know that people get offended by them. They are not intended as pornography. Pornography is a commodification of the human form. And that is not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is sacred images of different aspects of that dance between Shiva and Shakti. The link within everybody, the responsibility within everybody to connect the divine masculine aspects of themselves with the divine feminine aspects of themselves. And so the religious imagery you know, is of the yoni and the linga. And the linga represents the divine masculine, and the yoni represents the divine feminine. What is interesting to me is these are not viewed in the same relationship to pornography and sex as we connect them in the West. And that is not it at all. And tantra and yoga, those kinds of things that we look at as slightly as steamy to different levels and degrees in the West, that's not. The best comparison would be more like sacraments and religious ritual. And this is important because you will see this kind of imagery in a lot of art and architecture. Again, it's not designed to be pornographic. It's designed to reflect on that connection and relationship between the divine masculine, which is Shiva, and the divine feminine, which is Shakti. Isn't that interesting? But I think you could totally see why the European guys coming over would be so freaked out. And we're going to look at some architecture where this comes into play quite a bit. Well, what's fascinating to me too is as we look at Indian architecture, Hindu architecture, Buddhist architecture, you'll see an awful lot of overlap. This is an example of Hindu architecture. This is a sample of Buddhist architecture. What is interesting about this is a lot of Hindu architecture has these elements where you have platforms that represent the yoni, and then you have vertical elements that represent the lingam. And that is what they do. And from the West, we might think that it's a roofline or cupola, and that's the function it performs architecturally, but the shape represents this, the coming together of the divine and sacred masculine and feminine. And we'll see that. And for Buddhist architecture, we get a lot of these bell kind of things. What's fascinating about Buddhism is you get a lot of ideas like the wheel, or a lot of structures like the wheels and bells. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But one of them is the sound of the ring of the bell is a noise. It's something that's real that exists, but you can't touch it. You can't physically touch it. And so the sound, the ringing of the bell, becomes very quickly a symbol or a metaphor for the release into heavens of desires, a prayer, for example. And so anciently, it's believed that ringing bells and things like that would catch the attention of spiritual beings. And as we move forward, it became associated with the process of prayer, which I think is really fascinating because you can't see it, but it's still real. So we're going to look at some stuff. But the stupa is a building like this that is designed specifically to you go and visit this, and it is on a spot of ground that's important to Buddhist traditions, or it's to remind you of a specific behavior that's important to do as a Buddhist, or it's designed to house a specific relic. One of my favorites, and let's see if I can find it again. I'm going to go back a page. We look at this map of India. Right in this area, I believe, there is a famous stupa that contains a relic that is one of my favorite relics in the history of Buddhism, which is in the middle of this empty building is a pillar that holds the sandals that Buddha wore into nothing in service of other people. So of course there's nothing on the pillar. It's empty, but it holds the relic of the memory of those sandals. And I love that. I think that is just wonderful. Now, there are some really ridiculous stuff that we see from a Western engineering standpoint, ridiculous stuff. And by that, I'm not making light of it. I just the time it took and the energy it took really demonstrates how hardcore these people were in the expression of their own faith. The Ajanta Caves is this beautiful structure that is, it's not built, it's carved. And so, you know, there's this rock face here, and all these caves and structures are carved out of the living rock. And so you get images like this. This is something that is not, it's not sculpted in the traditional sense. These elements are not made independently and put together. All of this is carved from the face of the rock over 2,000 years ago. And, you know, there, you, of course, you have something like Shiva and Shakti together, and a lot of examples of the divine feminine, a lot of examples of the divine masculine together. But it is astounding to me. And this rock is not easy stuff to work with. It's hard. A lot of oh, I'm sorry. I should have shown. I clicked to this and nobody said anything, so I thought you could see it. But these caves are all carved out of the rock. And that's the thing that's so amazing to me. So when you look at this, if we were in the Etruscans, if we were looking at stuff from Greece or Rome or Egypt, you would have the floor. It would be one thing. And in the floor, there would be the bases of the pillars. The pillars would be assembled. And then the ceilings would be put on top of that. Here in the Ajanta Caves, if you can imagine, all of this was solid rock. And they actually carved this in. And you know, you look at some of these areas, this is stone lace that people carved out of the rock. It boggles my mind. And somehow these guys did it with tools not even close to what we have today, but they did it with an insane level of dedication and precision that is just amazing. And on this, on some of these videos, you can see some of the paintings and things like that. Not all the videos are in English. Some of them are in English, but the paintings, when we look at them, you'll see a lot of people that are made with several different colors. Blue, white, and red are the most common. And they, in their symbolism, those colors do mean some things that are specific. But one of the things I love about having inhuman colors in the painting is that it separates the imagery from you as a human being, and you don't have to feel threatened by it because it's outside of yourself. But on the other hand, you can also see its relationship to you because you're as different from a person who's blue as everybody else, which means you're also just as close. And I think that's kind of an interesting perspective, I think. Now this, what I like about this is a really beautiful example of a Hindu temple. Now, when you look at this, it looks to me, this reminds me a lot of some of the sets of like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars things. And there's a reason for that too, because each of the different planets in Star Wars has a different kind of architecture, and they draw from a lot of Earth influence to kind of generate an atmosphere for whatever the people of the planet are like. Now, in this kind of thing, now this is probably going to be built. A lot of it's going to be carved, but a lot of it's going to also be built as well. It's not like the Ajanta Caves, which is entirely carved. But some of the areas that I want to zoom in on is notice these pillars. What's on these pillars? It's not just decoration. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, it looks like a lot of human figures, and in my brain, it
Yes.
kind of feels like they'd be holding up the pillars as well. But I could be wrong because the detail's kind of a bit rough.
Yeah, the detail is rough, but it's good enough. You can tell they are human figures. And sometimes they're holding him up like a caryatid, but a lot of the times, excuse me, they're carved to fill the whole panel. So they're not necessarily lifting, like Trajan's column. It's not necessarily designed to look like they carry the weight, but it certainly looks like that from here because the figures fill the whole column, the whole space. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of male and female figures, and a lot of them are designed to be undraped. Remember, that's the word that we chose use in art instead of naked. They're undraped, so you can tell the gender. And the female figures are designed to represent or to call to mind or to symbolize that sacred feminine. And the masculine figures are designed to call to mind, remind us, or represent the sacred masculine or the divine masculine. And I think there's what's interesting to me is that when the British were colonizing India, a lot of these sites were defaced or hidden because they didn't want the unsullied Westerners, unsullied Europeans, to be devastated by this horrible vision of utter depravity. Now, I hope you guys understand how incredibly sarcastic I'm being. I just because now you know what we're looking at is not pornography. What we're looking at is sacred art. And so, with that in mind, what do these shapes remind you of? These tops of different areas. I'm quiet because I'm trying to find another image. Okay, here we go. Remember this? This represents the womb or the yoni. This represents the masculine, the penis or the lingam. You have this horizontal plate and you have this vertical post. And if we go back and look again at this, notice these structures right here. What do these represent?
That same dance, to put it
Yes.
as it's called.
Yeah, exactly. And, and it's, I love your restraint. Yeah, yes, but yeah, these represent that dance. We do have domes in Western architecture. As we go west from this area towards the Arabian Peninsula, you have domes being used for Islamic architecture and domes being used in Christian and Jewish architecture, and that represents the expanse of the heavens. So it's something similar, and then you will get spires on them that represent a reaching up. And it's interesting to me that you can have similar features in architecture from different cultures that mean parallel things, but each of them have their own distinct meaning. So I wanted to share that with you. And there are some other images as well to look at. I guess let me say, yeah, look at, like this one is a whole thing where it talks about these temples, but it's all in Hindi. But definitely look at a lot of these links. Here's one that's a good one. This is the article that has pictures of it with a gallery. So you can really see the architecture and you can see how incredible this stuff is. They put so many figures on the stone. It looks like the stone is made out of lace. And I really appreciate this article. I think they did a great job with it. So now we're going to move a little bit to the east and south as we start going into those areas leading the smaller countries leading into Indonesia and the islands. Now, this is particularly Thailand. And in Thailand, you get some really amazing, astounding imagery. And something like this is a dance that is designed to teach us about this, essentially the struggles of chaos and law, or evil and good. It's not always the same kind of concepts of evil and good as we might share in the West, but there's a lot of parallels to it. And what you'll see sometimes, the creatures in white might actually represent evil, and the creatures that are scarier looking might actually represent the good. Something like this with a long, tall spike right here. This is not a parallel necessarily to the lingam in the Indian architecture. This may represent more divine wisdom, divine knowledge. So it just depends on the situation and what exactly culture we're looking at. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica article that I linked to, and it gives examples of a lot of really good artwork. I'm sorry it's taking so long to load, so I'm having a hard time showing the images. Sigh. Okay. And this article also talks about the literacy of Thailand. And of course, because I want to show this stuff with you, things are having a hard time loading. That's awesome. I love that. Super great. But coming back to this, so the Smithsonian, Guggenheim, and Britannica, this is a really good article that talks a little bit about it. And the Guggenheim shows a lot of Southeast Asian arts. And it's not just Thailand, it's a lot of other countries there too. And then Smithsonian also happens to share their collection as well. And I am wondering what is going on. Suddenly my computer isn't loading anything. Okay, here we go. This is the Guggenheim. Gives you some really good background, but then it also shows a lot of the artwork. And of course, I can't find it right now because everybody's watching, and my computer's taking forever to load. Okay, here we go. Here's another good one. Now, when we see something like this panel, this is from Southeast Asia, you know, all those different cultures and stuff. And what's interesting about this panel, there's some things that we can take away from it. We see these human figures, and I'm going to use just the 4 tools of artistic critique really quickly. We see several figures that we can easily identify as humans. I see 5 right away. This person, these 2, this person, and this person right here. Now, what is interesting to me is that they are not overtly masculine or feminine. And this is something that is fascinating. Outside of India and Southeast Asia, what is really interesting is that when you start looking at divine figures or angelic figures, there is less of an importance that the artist feels to create a gendered figure. Doesn't have to be obviously masculine or obviously feminine. And the avatars of Buddha were both masculine and feminine. They were both men and women who were avatars of Buddha. And what's interesting is that even Gautama Buddha, who was a prince, is shown as more fluid expression of humanity. They're not. He's not always shown as a visibly male structure, like we saw with those the Indian carvings, where it was very feminine, very masculine. And so there's some interesting imagery going on, and I think it's one of those things again that makes this idea of the divine more accessible, where there's fewer barriers between the human and the divine being. We look at something like this, it looks like they are wrestling potentially from a Western perspective, and they're actually dancing together. And so when we see a flower form like this, a lot of the times, this is meant to be a stylization of a lotus. And lotus becomes very important in this part of the world when you're dealing with religious imagery, because a lotus is a plant that grows from the most stagnant of environments into something that is just resonantly beautiful. And it becomes very quickly a metaphor for the idea that a spiritual worldview can help a human being rise above those elements of themselves that keep them from being fully expressed, fully actualized. So definitely look at this. And this is a depiction of one of the avatars of Buddha. And you can see from the face, it is designed not to be overtly masculine. Like this is very masculine with the beard. Again, we saw the image of Hatshepsut, who identified herself as a woman, and she gave birth to a little boy. And she was shown at the beginning of her reign with a beard as well. So that may not mean as much as we might think. But in this case, Buddha is shown as an androgynous being, having traits of both obvious masculine and feminine features. And what is interesting is one of the reasons we know this is Buddha is because he has this halo, this ring of flames behind him. And on top of his head is what's called that knowledge bump. And this represents divine wisdom. There's some really absolutely beautiful stuff. So please go through and check that link out, definitely. One of the most fantastic things in the history of the planet is Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Angkor Wat was built about 600 years ago, possibly older. Again, we have that issue with colonizers dating things, trying to trying to rebuild the history of a culture. Now, I'm sorry, I said 600 years ago. About 10 years ago, everybody thought that this was only 600 years old. Now, if you look at this, 1150, it looks like it is a lot. People recognize that it's older than that, and might even go back further than that. It might be built on bases of much older structures too. So it's basically about 1,000 years old. So this is the Encyclopedia Britannica article about it. And I would like you to check it out. Angkor Wat is it's built on an island, and the island is kind of man-made, but on an earlier natural island. And what is fascinating about it is this is a whole complete temple complex. There are dozens of temples. And what's interesting is that it has something that feels similar to those Hindu kind of shapes. It's not quite the same, but there's a lot of stuff going on in there that I think helps or reminds us of the stuff we saw in India. But because this is Cambodia, they also have their own features. They have their own things. In some of these temples, they were originally Hindu and then resurfaced with portraits of the Buddha when Buddhism was in ascendance. And sometimes they're restructured to form other purposes as well. It depends on what the majority of the people are observing at the time, or rather the people in power are observing at the time. And as you look at this as well, this is a hallway. Again, it was designed as a Hindu structure that was fused with the the perspectives of the people in the area at the time. And let's see, I'm trying. What is interesting about this is it's all virtual, and it's hard for me to really navigate around it too much, but explore this as you can. This is in Google Arts and Culture, and you'll walk through it and look around. But one of the things that you'll notice is that this does appear to be a Hindu structure, but when Buddhism came on in the area, there were all these plaques that were carved into the base of the pillars. Each of the four sides of the pillars have these plaques, and they represent different stories of the Buddha. So that what we just saw was the hall, and I'm trying to get back to it, but I think I screwed it up. Some of the plaques have been taken off. Some of the plaques have been carved free, but it is really oh, here we go. Some of them survive. Like there's one under, and this talks about it here. Back here, there's more that survive. Some of them were just chiseled away completely. And it's interesting that a lot of these religious structures were repurposed so that people that were alive today with different worldviews could still use them. So there's some but that is definitely worth checking out. And then here, I thought this was interesting. This is a LiDAR scan that revealed an entire city that was covered by jungle growth. And of course, I had to include something from Ancient Aliens. So again, tongue firmly in cheek. But we have this video that I'm gonna share is we're not gonna watch the whole video, but it is a short 4-minute documentary where it talks about stupas again, and this whole stupa complex. And again, these are meant to be bells, and the bells the bells become a religious structure. Some of them will actually, some of these structures that are stone bells actually have bells inside of them, and some of them don't. Some of them have other things inside of them, but you see this kind of bell-like structure being shown again and again. And then you have more stories as well. Please do take the time to look at this stuff. This is from the Bhagavad Gita. It's one of the avatars of the sacred masculine coming to Earth and resisting the demon lords, fighting battles on the planet. And this is in Angkor Wat, and there's lots and lots of these panels and stories that are carved into the walls throughout. And again, a lot of it is very Hindu, and then some of it is redone, reworked, so that it matches Buddhist perspectives as well, which I just think it's really interesting. So I would definitely recommend watching this short video too. Now, one of my favorite temples, and there's only going to be a couple of these that I look at specifically, but Borobudur Temple is also in Southeast Asia. It's about 300 to 400 years older, they think, than Angkor Wat, and there are some really fascinating things going on there. And again, we have some articles here to check out. And it is a Buddhist temple, but it looks very Indian as well. It has a lot of that Southeast Asian flavor to it, I think. And I think some of the things you can see in here, now, even though this arch looks kind of Roman, um, it may not be, it's not appropriate to refer to it as a Roman arch because there isn't a lot of documentation that shows that the people constructing this were influenced by Roman architects. So we have to be careful in talking about different kinds of things and influences. If you guys want to write about that and you notice the similarity, then you say this looks very much like a Roman style arch, and that's perfectly appropriate. But it's not appropriate to say that this is definitively a Roman arch. So, but and then this kind of area, this is a corbelled structure behind this feature right here, which is another one of the arches that we looked at earlier. But you can see the panels right along here. And in this case, these are stories from the lives of the avatars of the Buddha. So there's going to be a lot of these kinds of stories. And again, like Cassandra pointed out, a lot of these figures, their feet are at the bottom and their head is at the top. In this case, they're not. That's not meant to communicate they're holding the platform up, but it's just making the figures in there as big as possible in the space provided. Essentially, they're filling all that space. And what's interesting though is that we can see, even though we have these definite bell structures all throughout, it does look an awful lot like that yoni and lingam structure that we see in the Hindu temples. And I think this is a good example of just the cross pollination that happens when cultures lean against each other and work with each other so much of the time. Now, this also reminds me very much of some of the pyramid structures that we've looked at. And I think that the argument can be made that the world's largest Buddhist temple might also be a pyramid. So, which I think is really interesting. Oh, and that brings us to the end of the stuff that we're looking at for this. But what I would like you guys to do is just go through as much as you can and click on those links. Look at this kind of stuff because it is absolutely fascinating. Now, from the things that you guys have seen, Cassandra and Zach, what really has struck you about this imagery, these things that we've seen from this part of the world?
First off, just how much of it, like kind of you said, bleeds into one another, whether it be uh kind of each of those cultures working together with like a specific structure or piece like over time, or
Uh-huh.
just one like grabbing all the pieces of the sandbox to say it in like a very softened way. Just very
Yes,
like
yes, definitely. And this is one of the reasons I love that you pointed that out, because this is one of the reasons why I picked Bhurubadar and Angkor Wat, is because this started as a Hindu structure and was heavily influenced by Buddhism. So you have the panels of the Buddha in the hallway carved into the stone. And then the next one, Bhurubadar, is a Buddhist structure, but it's heavily influenced by the forms and shapes of Hindu architecture. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
yeah.
Yeah, because these technically are supposed to be bells, and the reason why they're bells is because they're on a Buddhist temple. But they look very much to me like those structures that we saw with the Hindu stuff. Now, this right here looks a lot more like a bell dome to me. And, so that seems pretty obvious, and that there are some of these that are very round, but a lot of these, I think, like Cassandra, exactly like what you're saying, heavily influenced by, the Hindu structures, definitely. What do you think, Zach?
I'm always impressed at the large scale of these megalith things. I saw this one that the picture's on now, and on Ancient Aliens, they're talking about the bells on them, and just the size of it is absolutely impressive. And the one that's carved out, I had seen a documentary on that one as well, and they had somebody pull a sheet under one of those huge pillars. So not only is the whole temple cut out, but then under one of those pillars, they cut a 2 millimeter slice that is like, how, with what tool did they do that?
Yeah. How on earth could they have done that?
They're back and forth for a half a decade to do it. I just don't, my brain
Right.
can't add it up.
Yeah, yeah, and it's stuff like that that is just boggling. You're talking about the Enjati caves, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and it is astounding to me. And a lot of these things in the historical records that will say the king's family started this on this date, and then they finished it so many years later. And by the tools that people, and it's typically Western archaeologists think that they used, by the tools that people had access to, it should have taken them either a lot longer or there should have been several times as many people working on it. And either of those things, what we're talking about is engineering feats and feats of organization that are just astounding. And what this tells to me is that these structures that are built on worldviews of a culture, those worldviews and their relationship with the universe around them is so important that people were willing to do whatever it took to make something that is truly, truly astounding. I, I mean, that's what it says to me. And I think it's absolutely amazing.
I have a question for you since
Yes.
we're talking about these huge structures. Have you seen any of that they did radar or some type of scanning under the pyramids of Giza?
Yes.
These huge
Uh,
structures and tubes, and what do you think about that?
that is something that is pretty amazing to me. I think, let's see if I can find it. What is one of the things that is frustrating to me is that the information we get about this kind of stuff is almost always third hand. Somebody will find something out, but this is the kind of thing you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, somebody will find out that there are hollows and shapes. Somebody else will come up with an artist's quote unquote interpretation of what those hollows and shapes are. And what's interesting to me is a lot of the times the access that the artist who did something like this has is they're basically told, yeah, it looks like there's a bunch of vertical shafts. It looks like there's at least three big chambers and maybe something connecting them. And then they do a drawing like this, and so we think this is what they found. Or somebody's talking about, oh yeah, there are these massive underground network of pillars and hollows and all this kind of stuff. And so an artist comes up with this. That I really don't think that people have enough information to decide this kind of oh, what's it detail. But that part aside, what is amazing to me is that there are obviously structures underneath the pyramids. And when I about 40 years ago, I remember the King Tut exhibit coming to Seattle, and it was a big deal. And we left high school, we went and checked it out, going on a trip away from our families, all that kind of stuff, saw all this amazing stuff. At that point, everybody knew that pyramids were built and set, and the stones were set on limestone. And then I found a documentary that showed some of the shafts that were discovered by people putting little cameras on little robots and sending them through some of the cracks and crevices in the pyramids. And then they were finding some really interesting stuff underneath the pyramids. And there actually are shafts that go down, and underneath there are actually cisterns, wells filled with water. And in some of these, there are gigantic boxes made of a different stone that people still don't understand how the folks who made the pyramids got them under there. And then we also get, these kinds of things.
Do you think humans were capable of making all this huge stuff?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Humans are astonishingly brilliant, and I say that because I have seen absolutely amazing stuff, and the people that go to the ancient alien kind of perspective say, "Oh, humans couldn't possibly do that." They just are not. They don't want to accept the fact that our ancestors were every bit as smart and maybe even smarter than most of us today. An example of this is the Pythagoreans. We of course blame them for every person who's ever got a headache dealing with math, but it wasn't just math. The Pythagoreans looked at things like the golden section, looked at all this kind of amazing uh, relationships in the physical world, and then translated that as part of their religious practice to sounds. And they were the ones that recognized that certain frequencies, when placed together, would make very pleasing harmonies, and others, when placed together, would make very fractal harmonies or fractioning harmonies. And the Pythagoreans gave us essentially the music theory that people are still using today, 2,500 years later. They were absolutely brilliant. There was a 7th century Muslim philosopher in Baghdad that was aware of atomic theory. In about 600 BC to 400 BC, one of the branches of Greek philosophy talked about the tiniest particles of matter, and they're the ones that came up with the term atom. And they also said, as a corollary to that, that the stars that we see in the sky very well might each have their own planets circling around them. So they understood that the Earth circled around the sun. And then 1,000 years later, in 7th century Baghdad, this Muslim philosopher was thinking about the atom, and he wrote down, if at some point in the future a human being were able to crush an atom, to break it, they would release so much energy it would look like an explosion of the sun. That was written in about 690, right around there. What does that sound like to you?
Atomic.
Yeah, the nuclear warhead. And so people are incredibly smart. And just because we don't understand the engineering doesn't mean that they didn't. Because we have every culture develops its own way of looking at the universe and developing its own engineering. As an example that's a little bit more recent, World War II and the Cold War, subsequent Cold War, caused a lot of frustration with both American and Soviet physicists because American and Western electronics was based on the electron model that we all know and love. You have the positive and negative posts, for your battery, and everything runs in a current like that. We understand directional waves and everything. Soviet technology was actually based on a fusion of that with torsion model theory, which is a little bit different. The Western electronics theory is based on this idea that nothing moves faster than the speed of light, and things have to actually move. And the Soviet models were based on standing wave and torsion model theory, which one of the principles was that the entire universe can be shifted. You push on one side, that movement is translates through the matter of the universe and can instantaneously push on the other side. So you have very different ways of looking at it, and it made it so that if a MiG was stolen by a CIA agent, it still caused massive headaches on the physicists over here in the US because they still didn't understand how the Soviets did what they were doing. And you've probably heard about the Stargate program that President Bush Sr. was in charge of for a time when he was head of CIA, which is basically people using not quite astral travel, but it was a serious exploration that the CIA had into ESP. And if you guys have come across the movie with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Batman from Batman Forever called The Men Who Stare at Goats, that talks about the Stargate program that the US actually had. And it comes down to, if we don't understand it, that doesn't mean that somebody didn't do it or couldn't do it. It just means that if they did it anyway, they did it a different way than what we expect. People weren't dumb. People were smart. People have always been smart, and they always come up with different ways of doing stuff. So, Zach, I'm sorry you uncorked something, and I just had to let it go.
Appreciate your time.
So sorry about that. But any other observations? I think it is one of the things that I think is really important as we are looking at other cultures is you guys can see very quickly why Western Christian colonizers thought a lot of this stuff was pornographic. You can see that. But if we spend a moment just looking at things through the eye of the culture, trying to understand them, you can see that for them, it's sacramental. It's religious. It's not intended to be perverse or anything like that. And the message to me is loud and clear. It is really important to remember principles like semiotics and context. What does this mean? And some of these cultures that we look at, like particularly in Southeast Asia, it's also important to remember that they don't look at the world the same way that we look at the world today. They don't even look at gender the same way as we look at gender today. I think it's really important to remember that as you go through the process of artistic critique. Define what you're looking at, describe what you're seeing, kind of analyze how they put it together. And then as you go into the interpretation, look at the possible extrapolations of meaning that you can come across, because there's a good chance what you initially assume is not what's really going on. And I think that that's a really valuable lesson to have, not just looking at ancient cultures, but looking at everybody.
Sorry, just real quick, Zach.
Any last thoughts or observations?
You started really, really robotic to be all of a sudden. I was gonna check with Zach in case that was happening on his end too.
Yeah, I was hearing the robot noises as well. You were
As
kind of
people are still
breaking up
turning projects and stuff like that, please keep doing that. Before we go, I just wanted to mention, if you get anything other than perfect points, look at what I've written down, make the changes, or contact me so I can explain myself. And sometimes that means that I didn't understand what was going on. And sometimes that means you're just missing a little bit, and then you'll get the points you need. So remember, resubmit after you make the changes, or contact me for clarification, because there's absolutely no reason everybody in this class can't get an A. All right. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to visiting with you more next week.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.